Tonight, I am going to be talking about Chapter 4 in Everyday Consciousness and Primordial Awareness. The title of the chapter is Meditation Involving the Consciousnesses, and the book is by Trungpa Rinpoche. So far, the book has described the 8 consciousnesses, and later in the book, we will talk about the primordial awareness, how the 8 consciousnesses are purified and transformed into primordial awareness. And the book also explains how we get trapped in samsara and how to transform our, again, ordinary consciousness and get out of samsara by progression on the path. Most world religions encourage morality and virtuous behavior of body, speech, and mind, just like the Buddhists do. But the difference is there's a creator God in the other world religions, and your relationship to him or her determines your future situation. There are rewards and there are punishments. Buddhism takes a different approach, and the approach that we take is that all appearances are based on delusion. The karmic imprints from a delusion are stored in the 8th consciousness. Later on, these karmic imprints arise from the 8th consciousness, and thoughts appear in our 6th consciousness. Then appearances also arise from our 5 sense consciousnesses, and the 6 realms are an example of this. The input from the 5 sense consciousnesses plus the 8th consciousness. So we need to transform them by purifying the karmic imprints. And all aspects of delusion can be eventually purified and transformed and become the 5 kinds of primordial awareness. This is the completion of the path. This is the end of the path. A common analogy is the sun and the clouds. At one level, the clouds are blocking the sun, and when the clouds are parted, then the sun shines through. The sun has always been shining. So this is the view that all of this book is based on. Now, the possibility of purification of these 8 consciousnesses and their transformation into primordial awareness is why we meditate. This is why we practice. Very simply, it leads to fruition. Without meditation, it becomes more of the same old, same old. We keep finding ourselves making the same decisions, being in the same place. Even though it might be a different place, it is eerily similar to the old place. Needless to say, that is just spinning your wheels and leads to a lot of unhappiness and suffering, which is totally unnecessary. It is the mind that experiences happiness and suffering, and the causes of happiness and suffering are there also. So we tame our mind using meditation in order for us to get results, in order for us to experience the essence that has always been there. Buddha nature, primordial awareness, primordial wisdom, all of these are just different words for basically the same thing. So that's an important point to remember. There are 2 types of meditation that Trungpa Rinpoche talks about here. One is calm abiding, and the other is deep insight. We'll talk about calm abiding first here. There are different techniques used in calm abiding. One is following the breath, that the breath is the object of concentration. And this is the type of meditation that we do here and will actually do later on after this talk. This type of meditation, it helps tame our minds and it hinders arisal of thoughts. We're not trying to stop the thoughts when we do this shamatha meditation. We're just trying to let go of the thoughts, and eventually the thoughts do not arise as quickly and as powerfully. There are other forms of calm abiding meditation that can be done that are better for some individuals. And what follows next is a list of various types of calm, abiding meditation, which involves the consciousnesses. And these follow the ninth Karmapa's teachings and some of the texts that he wrote. For instance, the Ocean of Definitive Meeting and pointing out the Dharmakaya. So the first one is using the I consciousness. The title of this type is Holding the Mind Based on the I Consciousness. And you can focus on an impure object with your eyes, or you can focus on an impure object of meditation. We'll start out here with an impure object. He uses the example of a small stone, or it could be a flower, could be a piece of wood, and you would place that in front of you and then look at it with your eyes. Now, the eye consciousness does not meditate. After the perception by the eye consciousness, thoughts arise in the mind consciousness. So at this point, we use our focused concentration of the eyes and the eye consciousness on the object and keep bringing our mind back to that object. This keeps the mind quiet and tranquil. It really is a little bit more difficult than he makes it sound in the book, if you've ever tried this, but through diligence, you keep bringing your mind back to the object that you are looking at in front of you. The eye consciousness continues to look at the object, and then when the mind wanders, bring the mind back to the object. It's very similar to following the breath. And in fact, the object in front of you, if it's a stone or a flower or whatever, is actually a lot easier to follow than the breath, which can be very subtle. It's important to be not too tense and not too loose. This is an act of, in his words, mere seeing. The object of perception is merely perceived. There is no commentary about it. You do not try to stir up thought about it, thinking whether I like this rock or the rock is smooth, rock is rough, or whatever. We just keep our eyes on the rock and we keep our mind on the eye consciousness's input to our sixth consciousness, the mind consciousness. Again, it is the mind consciousness that meditates. The eye consciousness cannot meditate. So the mind will follow the eye consciousness. And this can lead to holding the mind at one pointedness. Quote, one pointedness of mind is attained through merely not forgetting the focal object. He ends this section by repeating that it is called holding the mind based on the eye consciousness with an impure object of focus. Now, with a pure object of concentration for the eye consciousness, it would be to place a small Buddha statue in front, or it could be another object of Dharma, another Dharma object. It could be a book, could be a bell. Needless to say, there's lots of objects that could be placed in front that are sacred. A Buddha statue or any object of Dharma is considered a pure object because it usually inspires faith and devotion towards the Buddha and the path. He does add that it doesn't matter whether this actually does develop faith or trust. That's not the point. But it works just like the impure object, meditation on an impure object. And again, having a pure object can help the mind concentrate by merely not forgetting, where there's more of this trust and faith associated with the object. He goes on to say that when you're meditating like this, you can have different kinds of experiences. Distraction will arise, of course. And it's simply, if your mind gets agitated, direct your attention towards the lower part of the statue, like the lotus seat. And if dullness and haziness arise, concentrate towards the upper part of the statue. For instance, the Buddha's top knot or the head of the Buddha. And this is very similar to instructions when you're following the breath. And when you get drowsy, you want to raise your eye gaze up higher. even as high as the ceiling. And when you get agitated, you want to lower your gaze. So it's very similar to that. Now, he talks about three different stages in this meditation on the sacred object, the pure object. And he got these from the 9 stages of shamatha. So the first one is resting the mind. For beginners new to meditation, it's important to, first of all, meditate for a short time. He doesn't say how much a short time is, but I would say probably 5 to 10 minutes. As a beginner, your mind is restless and it wanders. You need awareness and mindfulness that's not too tight and not too loose. I was reminded when he talked about that of the story of the Buddha teaching meditation to a sitar player. And a sitar is a stringed instrument, and it has, I believe, 52 different strings. And tuning it is quite complicated, getting all those 52 strings in tune with each other. And when it came to the meditating, not too tight and not too loose, the sitar player was having a hard time understanding this. And so the Buddha said, well, how do you tune your instrument? And he said, well, I pluck the string and I listen to it and I tighten it up and then I pluck it again and I keep doing that until it's just right. It's not too tight and not too loose. And the Buddha said, that's the way you meditate, not too tight, not too loose. And you are the one that has to decide what is in between too tight and too loose. The next stage is continuous setting. And here, for short periods of time, you don't stray from the object. You're actually able to keep your mind on the object of concentration. And there are going to be moments of clarity along with this. And again, it might not be very long before you're distracted and your mind is off somewhere totally different. But after becoming proficient, then you can have experiences of the third type, which is resetting the mind. Here, when there's a distraction, the mind wanders when meditating. And through your awareness, you have recognition of the distraction. And you could think, for instance, I'm not focused on the object. And you bring your mind back to the object. You avoid judgments about the distraction rather than thinking, oh, there I go again, I can't meditate or whatever, getting frustrated. Just accept it, that it's not good or bad that you got distracted. It happens. And I was thinking, as he was talking about this, don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but it kind of reminded me of rebooting your digital device. Just go back to the meditation and drop whatever it was that you were distracted by and drop any kind of commentary about being distracted and being a bad or a good meditator. So these 3 stages can be used with any meditation involving the consciousnesses, these 5 sense consciousnesses, as well as the mind consciousness. The next is holding the mind based on the ear consciousness. And this is very similar to the eye consciousness. And I have received instructions on doing this type of meditation from Mingyur Rinpoche, and I believe it was Gyalwang Karmapa, actually. So here you place your ear consciousness and your mind consciousness on a sound and use the above 3 steps. Now I add this, you could have an impure sound from a sound that enters your place of meditation. When we would meet in Eau Claire at the UU Society, there were church bells that would ring at 6 o'clock. Frequently, if you're in a city, there might be some traffic noise. But what you can do then is just place your mind consciousness on what your ear consciousness is sending it. And just listen to the sound. Don't make any commentary about it, whether it's good sound, bad sound. Just listen to it. And when the sound is gone, then you have nothing to place your awareness on. Where I have heard it or experienced it is when the person leading it has a singing bowl, and a large bowl at that, that rings for a very long time. And they will ring the bowl, and it slowly gets softer and softer and softer. And about when it's ready to die out, they strike it again. My experience has been when it's done in a public arena in front of a large group of people, that usually it's done for about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But again, if you follow these 3 stages, it helps you tame your mind, helps strengthen your ability to focus one pointedly on a object of one of the 5 senses. Then the next is holding the mind based on the nose consciousness. And here he says we have to look at the functioning of the nose consciousness first. I found it interesting. He said that the mind consciousness is excellent at thinking about smells, fragrances, odors, and so forth. All these words carry judgments. And I immediately thought, when I read that, about when I went outside the other night late and I smelled a skunk. So there's another judgment. So here you focus on what the sense consciousness is experiencing, but again, without thought, without judgment. You keep coming back to that object of smell, and you just hold the mind on that nose consciousness, whatever input it is giving you. And if we're going to use an impure object, it could be like essential oils. You could think of a lot of things that you might want to just keep your mind consciousness on. And then if it was a pure object, what came to my mind would be the incense burning on your shrine. Next is the tongue consciousness. And we, of course, experience this when we eat. Trungpa Rinpoche said, quote, when we eat something, we experience a very intense taste. And I found that very interesting, because a lot of times when we're distracted, the taste isn't that intense. But when I have led mindful eating, people do comment on how good the food tasted and things like that. So part of this intense taste is actually paying attention to it, putting our mind consciousness on the taste consciousness. And then, of course, it does become intense. He also mentions the taste consciousness having an experience of subtle tastes. The mind consciousness needs to focus on without distraction. He feels that that's more important focusing on than the gross tastes, the intense tastes. And I would add to this that there's plenty of, shall we say, mental baggage that comes with food and taste. We have our preferences, we have things that we don't like, we have allergies and sensitivities, and so on down the line. I remember once leading a raisin tasting exercise, and immediately one person said, I don't like raisins. She refused to participate. So we bring a lot of habitual patterns, a lot of karmic traces to food and tastes. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche even talked about food neurosis, that we really can develop some very strong neurotic tendencies around food and having food exactly the way we want it and avoiding food that we do not like. Maybe even feeling a feeling of entitlement. Trungpa Rinpoche doesn't mention pure or impure food here. What comes to my mind in terms of pure food would be the food that is blessed during a soak offering. And soak means assortment. It's an assortment of food. It's put on a shrine. and blessed. There's a long puja that goes along with the soak, and that would be pure. An additional thought came to mind, and that is that Rinpoche said this one time about soak food. Do not pick and choose, that it's all blessed, just eat. You're given a bowl or a plate with this food on it, and he said, just eat what's on the plate. So now the body consciousness is next. Meditation input from the body consciousness. It apprehends physically tangible objects. And just a few of this body consciousness are touch, pain, tightness, pressure, and a person in the medical profession could probably give you a long list of other sensations that the body consciousness can send to the mind consciousness. Krangu Rinpoche feels that even without any of these feelings, the body apprehends continuously a fine and pleasant physical sensation. That's a direct quote. So the meditation is to focus on this sensation throughout the body, rather than a particular pain, tightness, stiffness, or whatever, but this fine and pleasant physical sensation. He doesn't say too much more than that. Then he comes to meditating on the sixth consciousness, the mind consciousness. And again, this is based on the same books as meditating on the sense consciousnesses is based on by the books by the ninth Karmapa. First here is holding the mind with a focus. So you visualize 3 drops. The Tibetan word would be tigle, a white, a red one, and a blue one. They're in the space in front of you, much like you would visualize a deity in a frontal visualization. He doesn't mention whether they are horizontal or vertical or just kind of random. I'm not sure if it makes a difference, but it is our mind that creates them and then concentrates on them one-pointedly. And of course, when you lose your concentration, the drops disappear because they're totally a result of your own mental effort. There's no physicality to them. It's easier for beginners to keep their eyes closed. There's a tendency to meditate on the visualization of a deity with your eyes closed. But by repetition, the stability and the clarity increases, and it becomes easier to do this visualization with the eyes open. And it's more useful, more beneficial to meditate this way with your eyes open. So while we're meditating with a focus on the mind consciousness, it does entail a certain conceptual activity because you are putting effort into creating this visualization. It's not that it just arises without any conceptual activity. So this conceptual activity of keeping the 3 balls in your mind is subtle, but it's necessary. Your effort created this visualization. And this is why the development stage in deity visualization is called the creation stage, because we're creating this visualization of the deity. So that is holding the mind with a focus. Next is holding the mind without a focus. Let the mind relax. You could call this open awareness also. It's really another term for the same type of meditation. There's no object to focus on. The mind consciousness and the 5 consciousnesses are active. You let whatever input these 5 sense consciousnesses give your 6 consciousness. You let it happen, but you let go of it. You don't focus on it. You keep coming back to just relaxing. If you become proficient at that, there's actually no possibility for positive or negative thoughts to arise. The clarity aspect of the mind is not interrupted, and the rough thoughts that do arise dissolve. They come from emptiness and they return to emptiness. Mindfulness and awareness are very, very important here. By applying mindfulness, one doesn't forget your meditation, and the awareness is continually present and aware of what the mind is doing. This is a very important point. You have to maintain, you might say, vigilance, keeping the awareness and the mindfulness, and both of them present. I remember a teaching of Krangu Rinpoche's, totally unrelated to this book in terms of the teaching. It wasn't part of this book, but he was talking about mindfulness and awareness. I believe he was using this example to explain mindfulness. He said in India, in banks, is usually a guard, maybe always a guard. And in some banks, they don't trust the guard. And so the gun that the guard is given is chained to a post outside of the bank so the guard doesn't enter the bank and hold up the bank. If we place too much emphasis on mindfulness and forget about the awareness, it's a bit like the guard going into the bank and robbing it because you are not really aware of where your mind is mindful. You could be very mindful of a long string of thoughts. So they act this way, that the awareness is aware of whether our mind is on the object or not, and the mindfulness is placing the mind on the object. On the other hand, because we're letting the mind relax, we need to have a light touch with the mindfulness and the awareness. We need to be alert, but a relaxed state of alertness. This brings a clarity that is continuous, and then again, the coarse thoughts do gradually subside and do not appear nearly as frequently. So this is called holding the mind without a basis or a focus. You are just relaxing the mind, but there is no focus. Now, he has covered meditations for the 5 sense consciousnesses, the 6th consciousness, which is the mind consciousness, and the all base consciousness. There is no meditation method for the 7th consciousness. The clarity aspect of mind, in his words, an unfabricated cognition, a mere perception. It is the true nature of mind. And this goes back to the 8th consciousness, as I mentioned, that it's holding the mind without a basis, includes the 8th consciousness, the mind consciousness, and the all base consciousness meet together. The mind consciousness rests in the 8th consciousness. And there is this continuous clarity of the mind. The clarity is the true nature of the mind. This is achieved by pacifying the coarse thoughts. As this occurs, or when this occurs, it's important to, again, rely on mindfulness and alertness. In this case, mindfulness is the subtle but continuous message, I must meditate. On the other hand, it would be too tight if you would be thinking, I am meditating. This is just another thought. And as you know, once you have a thought, very quickly it gives birth to another thought. And then that thought gives birth to another. And we have a train of thoughts. And pretty soon we're a long ways from just letting the mind rest. He does mention that mindfulness is like a watchman. And even though mind is not dualistic with a watcher and the watched, we still have to keep this mindfulness alert. And he says, like a watchman. So alertness keeps the mind from getting lost in thoughts. Things like, I remember this, now I am meditating, and so on and so forth. A continuously functioning mindfulness and alertness, as I said, really keep the meditation on track and keep you from getting lost in thoughts. Now, here are 2 errors that can happen when you are meditating. One is that you become so relaxed that you are drowsy. He talks about visual appearances arising that sometimes you mistake for a real meditation experience. He says it's just thoughts that arise, and that because the mind is drowsy and dull, it can appear visually and in other forms. The antidote to this is, he says, to straighten up, exert yourself more, exert your mind more. You can tighten up your back muscles. Besides straighten up, put more tension in your back muscles. And this increases the clarity of the mind and tends to bring you to a more awake state. And then the opposite is that if you are agitated, to lower your gaze, relax, maybe even slump a little bit, that can calm the mind down. So that completes the discussion of this section of the book. Well, the question was, if you're thinking of your favorite food, isn't that conceptual? And maybe I misrepresented this section. The idea of meditating on taste was to actually have it in your mouth. And then you don't have to think about it, and you don't want to think about it, just experience it. The question was about this fine, pleasant body sensation that we all have that is constant. And when you're having difficulties with your body, constant pain, and so forth, how can you experience that? Now, I'm going to just speak from, you might say, my own experience, and add a little speculation here. So I could go out in a limb here and get in big trouble. It's difficult, especially if you never experienced it before you had the pain. I would say that that is you might say, the beginning or a glimpse of the bliss that the body has. That's where I'm speculating, but it seems to me it's a pretty obvious leap to say that this is the beginning or a glimpse of the bliss that a body can feel, well-being. If you have this pain constantly, I would say that part of it is being able to not be controlled by the pain, first of all, where the pain doesn't completely take up all of your awareness, where you have some room to experience other things. Don't get frustrated, because again, it's going to be much more difficult if you have the constant pain. This is a different sense. I have tinnitus, and so I have constant ringing in my ears. And I have tried to give meditation instructions to people who also have it, and they can't meditate because it's too distracting. So work with it. And if you can lower the amount of attention you place on the bodily pain, then the more likely you'll get a glimpse of this subtle well-being feeling.